As I walked through the doors of the world-famous cafe, my pilgrimage had come to an end. Or did it? Continuing from my last video, my wife and I said farewell to Kyoto, and now we jumped on the famous Japanese Shinkansen, which is a high-speed train which goes up to about 240 kilometers per hour to 320 kilometers per hour. Our next destination, Ueno City within Tokyo Prefecture. I always used to think that Tokyo was a city, but it's actually made up of various different wards, Ueno being one of them. Prior to boarding, my wife and I purchased an Ekiben, which is considered a traditional train bento box, which is consumed on the train. The Ekiben consists of rice, some grilled meat, such as chicken, or fish, or beef, and various other things. But being the greedy git that I am, I polished off the lot without actually taking a photo, so I'll just have to show you a graphic instead. As is typical of Japanese trains, the commute was relatively quiet. There were plenty of seats to sit in, unlike the standard Japanese trains, and also no one was on their phone trying to make phone calls. However, being a fella and going to the toilet and trying to do a slash at 240 kilometers per hour has its challenges, especially when you're trying to balance and you know, point Percy at the same time. Fortunately, a catastrophe was averted and I sat my ass back down and enjoyed the train ride. Considering this was my first long day commute in Japan, my eyes were glued to the window. That was until the trolley lady came across with various different drinks and edibles, and I wanted to say in Harry Potter fashion, I'll take the lot, but I refrained from doing so, otherwise I'd end up getting a throttling from my wife. As we journeyed, the landscape gradually transformed. What started out as expansive farmlands gave way to suburbs, and then from suburbs it started to meld into the city. Upon reaching Tokyo, we switched a couple of trains, and then we eventually arrived in Ueno, which is famous for its zoos and museums. But on this instance, we weren't actually visiting any of the zoos and museums, we were just using Ueno as a launch pad to go to places like Shinjuku or Akihabara. Once we arrived at the hotel, we had to wait in reception. And during that time, I decided to make myself a cup of tea from the communal dispenser. And being the athletic, dexterous person that I am, I ended up putting boiling hot water into a plastic cup. And as you can imagine, I reflexively dropped the bloody lot and almost scalded myself in the process, so that's a massive embarrassment as soon as I got in there. After my wife and I regrouped, we jumped on another train to start our Tokyo adventure. And our first destination was what can be considered the technological Mecca or nerd Mecca of the world, Akihabara. I mentioned in my previous video that Kyoto was essentially overload. However, in hindsight, I would say that was more in a cultural and traditional sense. However, as you can see, Akihabara brought with it what could be considered the peak scale of modern culture, and with it, the bustling atmosphere that Tokyo is renowned for. Once my wife and I had situated ourselves, we explored some of the major electronic shop chains, such as Yodobashi Camera and Bit Camera. These stores were completely on another level. They were absolutely mental. In Australia, you would normally see one aisle dedicated to keyboards and mice, maybe two aisles at most, and that was various different brands. However, in Yodobashi Camera and Bit Camera, some of these places had whole aisles, maybe two aisles dedicated to one specific brand of keyboard. That just emphasizes the scale of how big these stores were. There is often a misconception that because Japan is envisioned as a majorly technological place, that with it brings cheaper items and commodities. However, in my experience, things like graphics cards and other computer parts were pretty much on par, if not sometimes slightly more expensive than what I would pay for back in Australia, and probably the UK as well. After extensively perusing these stores and taking stock of items that I would think about buying when I finally settled into Hokkaido, my wife and I then left the stores and moved on to the arcades in Akihabara. It had been around 17 years since I last visited arcades as a teen back in the UK, and perhaps I'm starting to become a bit of a fuddy-duddy now, but walking into some of these arcades, the noise was so loud, I couldn't believe it. However, as they say, if you can't beat them, join them, and so I played a game called Taiko no Tatsujin, and in true Dire Straits fashion, I bloody banged on those bongos like a chimpanzee. It was great. Having seen these drum games on other YouTube channels in the past, I finally had the chance to have a crack. After showing myself up, my wife and I left for the world-famous cafe, whose mother company produces world-famous Japanese role-playing games. Having played these games since my childhood and accruing a massive collection, I'd finally arrived at the Square Enix cafe in Akihabara. Square Enix are the publishers of games such as Dragon Quest, Octopath Traveler, and my favourite, Final Fantasy. Upon entering the cafe, I was greeted with various different displays of the then new game Octopath Traveler 2, which was very cool. However, considering I'd never played those games before, I found it difficult to try and have some sort of emotional attachment to it. That didn't stop me from purchasing a curry and drink in the Octopath theme. Truthfully, the food was okay at best, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a bit miffed about the lack of Final Fantasy decorations. I had a look at the cafe's gift shop and I bought myself a Chocobo plushie. And I also bought myself a Final Fantasy VII 25th anniversary cocktail skewer. After thinking my pilgrimage to my favourite publisher's cafe was over, I had a think and I remembered, oh wait a minute, there's actually another store in Shinjuku. However, that would have to be scheduled for the next day or the day after, as by this point my wife and I were very tired, and so we decided to retire back to the hotel. The next morning, my wife wanted to go to a shrine that she hadn't been to since 2018, when she used to study English in Tokyo. The shrine was on a smaller scale, but that did not detract from its beauty. Upon entering the shrine, I was immediately struck with awe as I saw my very first sakura, or otherwise cherry blossom. After taking some photos of the tree, I had an opportunity to have my shrine book that I purchased in Kyoto stamped, and also had the shrine calligrapher mark my book for me. It only cost a small fee, but I am now collecting these gorgeous looking stamps. Whilst doing this, I could hear some of the shrine members playing traditional Japanese instruments in the background. I believe they were playing the hichiriki, which is a woodwind instrument. I will play a brief melody that I made using software that has sampled this instrument's quality. Additionally, the shrine had a lovely little neko, or cat, roaming around, just chilling and doing its thing. Cats are very popular in Japan, and it was the nice icing on the cake which gave the shrine a bit of extra charm. Having finished our nice visit to the shrine, it was breakfast time. And what better way to have a hearty breakfast than to go to a local Chinese food shop for your breakfast. However, in fairness, it was one of the best Chinese dishes I'd ever tried, and that's in comparison to the Chinese that I had in the UK and the Chinese in Australia. It was quite surprising. On top of that, whilst I don't remember the price exactly, the portions were really generous as well, and they even give you a little jelly dessert to go with it. It was awesome. Having stuffed our faces, my wife and I strolled over to a special shrine that is called the Kitsune Shrine, or otherwise the Fox Shrine. Taiko drums could be heard as we walked around the shrine, taking in all of the sights. Again, I asked the staff members to stamp my shrine book, and afterwards my wife and I departed for the Tokyo ward of Shinjuku, which is considered one of the cornerstones of Japanese nightlife, for all the wrong and right reasons. However, on this occasion, we were exploring Shinjuku during the daytime, so in this video don't expect too many shenanigans. My wife and I visited a street where there's a live stream camera pointed down the street. Both she and I had been watching this stream for so many months, just before we moved to Japan, just to build up excitement, and I'll actually leave a link in the description of this live stream camera. It was brilliant. We were finally standing in the same street that we'd been watching for so many months. I even actually picked up my phone and gave my mother a call and told her to go onto the live stream camera after I sent her the link, and it was funny because she could actually see us with a bit of a delay, of course, about 5-second, 10-second delay, on the live stream camera waving at her, which I thought was pretty neat. As we left that street, we started walking perpendicular to that street on our way to the Square Enix cafe, and as we passed various different streets, we kept looking down them to see what was down there. Once again, I was taken by surprise. As I looked down one of the streets, I could see the king of monsters, awakened from the radiation from the Hiroshima nuclear bomb, and now inhabiting one of the buildings down the street of Kabukicho. The Japanese know him as Gojira, and the West call him Godzilla. On a side note, I was very impressed by the level of detail my phone was able to capture from such a far distance away. After being thoroughly chuffed at seeing this, my wife and I pressed on to the second Square Enix cafe, but not before we crossed the road, because directly across the road was the famous chicken gym. That's right, chicken gym. Well, as you can imagine, I had a little chuckle at the name, especially considering the running joke about people only ever working out their upper body. Finally, after our long walk, my wife and I had finally reached the second Square Enix cafe, but it was bloody closed. My wife apologised to me, considering she was the one that navigated, but I said to her, it's fine, it's not her fault that it's closed. But obviously I was a bit gutted that they weren't open, because I wanted to see their wider selection of Final Fantasy gear. How dare they? So what does this mean? Well, it actually means that the next time I go to Tokyo, my pilgrimage will continue, and I will go to the second Square Enix cafe.
I'll see you soon, Square Enix.
It was getting late by this point, so my wife and I made our way back to this train station, but not before we did a bit of clothes shopping. But as you can see, absolutely no clothes were bought on that day. On our final day in Tokyo, my wife and I had actually organised to meet up with two of our friends from our Australia days. We would be meeting up with Mariko, a lovely Japanese girl from Nagano, in the morning, and later in the night we would then be meeting up with my mate Ricky from Australia. Mariko, my wife, and I went to one of the most famous temples in Japan, the Sensoji Temple, but not before coffee. Mariko directed us to a little coffee shop on one of the pathways leading up to the Tokyo Skytree. Interestingly, this coffee shop owner was previously awarded Australian Coffee Champion, and the twist is that he's Japanese. This is further interesting, as I had a barista lesson with a former New Zealand champion of coffee, and funny enough, his wife is also Japanese. Once we left the coffee shop, we took a taxi to the Sensoji Temple, and as soon as we arrived, it was absolutely jam-packed. There was people everywhere, and on either side of the path leading to the temple, there was little market stalls selling either shrine-type memorabilia or different Japanese omiyagi being souvenirs. But it was heaving. My wife Mariko and I had a look around, and then we walked into the main area where a ceremony was taking place. Unfortunately, I was not able to take photos of the ceremony itself because it was prohibited. However, I took pictures of some of the signs and the ceiling of that area, and the artwork in there is absolutely gorgeous, and it really reminded me of the ceiling in Vatican City. Having seen parts of the ceremony, I proceeded to have another stamp placed in my book, and afterward we were treated with the view of a koi carp pond. As per Japanese mythology, they may look small now, but one day they'll turn into dragons. Having finished up at the shrine, the girls and I jumped back on the train to Ueno, where we would meet up with my mate Ricky at the local Starbucks, and it was time for a coffee top-up. I remember when I was 23 and Ricky and I would meet up for a steak and some drinks, and he would talk to me about his time studying in Japan, and at that time I was so jealous and at the same time so enthralled by the stories that he was telling me. It was so nice to finally be in Japan at the same time as him. We did some exploring of nerdy anime shops, and I was quite surprised by how much stuff they actually had. And afterwards, we went for food at a budget izakaya called Torikizoku. After stuffing our faces and having plenty of drinks, we then decided to go outside to the local konbini and bought ourselves some alcoholic drinks, and we walked around under the neon lights and drank, which was awesome because you're not allowed to drink alcoholic drinks out in the open in Australia, so it was a whole different sort of freedom. It was fantastic. After our awesome night, we all strolled back to Ueno station, where both of our friends went went each of their ways, and then my wife and I went back to the hotel room where we started to pack, as it was our last night in Tokyo, and the next day was going to be our flight to Hokkaido, and where we started our new journey, our new life and our new home. So please continue watching, as in the next video I will be showcasing my arrival in Hokkaido and me settling in. So if you want to come on the journey with me and see what I experienced in my now new home, please hit the like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Bye.